and as this community is increasingly known for, let us very warmly welcome the vibrant Kim Dower. So without further ado, let's welcome Marsha up to the podium to read her poem. Today we have Mariano Zaro. Please give him the warmest welcome. I thought today would be a good day. What we did in September is we opened our featuring with Anne, who was our previous poet laureate, the fourth, and I wanted to finish the season with Ricardo, who was our first poet laureate. Welcome back to Nathan Hassall Poetry. Today we have 4 live interviews with incredible contemporary poets recorded at our Caffeinated Verse Series, which is a once-a-month series that I host out in Malibu, where I feature a poet and follow it with an open mic. These interviews were taken from the Q&A portion of the featuring. These poets are Kim Dower, Marsha De La O, Mariano Zaro, and Ricardo Means Ybarra. If you're new here, please do click subscribe to keep up to date with weekly poetry videos. By the end of this video, you will have learnt so much more about contemporary poetry and will come out the other side a stronger poet for it. Without further ado, here's the video. So Kim,
so Nathan,
thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
For bringing that energy and your wonderful poetry to life in that way. One thing that's so evident by, your personality that I've learnt so far, your stage presence and your poetry is humour. And there clearly feels like often a doorway into the work, and there's other subjects seem like they come up around humour often in the poems that I've read of yours. Would you like to speak to how you feel humour's functioning in your poetry?
How it's functioning?
Yeah.
It laughs. The poems, they laugh to each other. I don't mean to make fun of your question. I feel like, my last 4-week session in West Hollywood, it was about humor and poetry, and it doesn't mean like funny like Ogden Nash, but it's just putting humor in poetry. And people are having a hard time with it. And I brought in a lot of poems that I think have humor in them, and we would read them, we talk about them. The truth is, if you don't see funny, and you don't think funny, if you're not funny, you're not gonna write funny. That's just what, you can't force funny. Do you know what I mean? Yes. We all have friends who are not funny. But they know a good joke. They can laugh. They know it's funny, but they won't be making you laugh. Do you know what I mean? But they make you do other things, and you love them, but this is the same about poems. It's like, there's poems we love that aren't funny because they bring you other things. So for me, humor always gets in there. It just gets in, even when I try to push it out. So all the poems I wrote about my mother, her dementia, her being in the home, all of these things, they all are funny. They have funny things in them because it was easier for me to even deal with the subject matter through humor. So I have a poem called "The People in the Health Food Store Don't Look Healthy." Right? That's funny already. Every time I walk into Erewhon, it looks like they're going to need to call an ambulance. So that was a funny poem for me to write. But then the poem got very sad and dark. So humor functions in my poetry by really helping me to get to where I want to be through the funniness of it. Like bottled water. Yeah. Thinking, do I put my mother in a home or just get her a caregiver? That's what was on my mind, trying to buy the bottled water, but the poem is about bottled water. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Makes perfect sense. Oh.
That was my journey.
Thank you. Great answer. So something, it didn't come up as much in this reading specifically, but I listened to another interview with you, and you're speaking about writing dreams, and that's something that I really relate to, because I think dreams are just rich with the symbolism and metaphor creation that you can put into poetry. What do you think the I don't know if this is the right word, but like benefits of using dreams to help prompt or write poetry about? Did that come across? Does that make sense?
No, it doesn't make any
Good.
sense.
Good.
So your questions don't make much sense, Nathan. But no,
Free will
of course
anyway.
we know just what he means. And dreams are fabulous prompts. They're prompts. You know, no one wants to read every one of your poems saying, in my dream last night, you know, so we have to be clever and kind of move it out of the dream. But the imagery that we can get from a dream can be very useful. So I used to, when I was younger, I could get up in the middle of the night and write down my dream. And then in the morning, it would be there waiting for me, like a little bird brought me something. And there were a lot of images. It's like when I wake up in the middle of the night from a dream, like, oh, please, just let me fall back to sleep now. And I feel like I'm losing some good things there, because dreams have great value. Just use the images, and I'm trying to think of an example. A lot of my poems come from dreams. And I do have a poem I wore this dress today for you, Mom, about dreaming that I was pregnant at 60, and Meryl Streep said, that's too old to be a mother. And I did put that in a poem, and I thought it was hilarious. And the poem then becomes something else, just being an older mother and being pregnant, you know, all these things. But that was the prompt for me. That was a great image. You know, a lot of the imagery in our dreams it's very personal. And but I am haunted by a dream I had last night, and I might use it. So everything for a poet is material. Well, for any writer is material, but dreams I think are better for poets because of the surreal aspect. And also it's more of a prompt. You know, if you're writing a novel, I don't know if a dream is very helpful for you, unless it tells you how to end the novel, then it's very helpful. But yeah, did I answer that question well?
I don't remember my questions when I asked them, so I'm just going to say yes, because it was an interesting answer.
Okay.
So that's all that matters, I think. I'll ask maybe something that's less wordy. You spoke about, you know, poets can be non-autobiographical, but many people believe that what you write is biographical. How much do you think that we can take liberties to be completely away from the autobiographical? And how do you think that serves a poem? That was way more worded than I thought.
That I really don't understand.
Yeah, okay.
But I know what you mean.
Just speak about non-autobiographical something in poetry.
Well,
That was last night's dream.
well, I will say that there's an image. I grew up in this building on 96th Street in Central Park West, and it had a very interesting lobby, or very ornate lobby. And I was talking to someone the other day about the prices of apartments in New York and Los Angeles, and you know, so these things will come up in your dream. But in my dream last night, when I walked in, the lobby was someone's apartment. These people had 2 beds, and it was the lobby, and there was a lamp, and I'm like, there's an apartment in the lobby now? What happened to the lobby? And they said, well, we needed the extra apartment, so we put it in the lobby. And so anyway, I can't get that image out of my head. It was a very nice apartment too. But so here's the thing, and I think this is a serious answer for all of us who write, etc. In a poem, I always say, the facts and the details do not need to be true, but the feeling and the emotion does. You can't make up a feeling, you can't make up an emotion. So the feeling that one gets from reading the poem, you want that to be real, and it needs to be real from you to get that from your reader. But the details and the facts and the build-up and the story does not need to be true. We can make any of that up, you know. So And honestly, I wore this dress today for you, Mom, is there's a lot of things from my life in this book, but my book coming out next year, I sure hope people don't think it's true. So that book is very different, and it's called What She Wants, and it's a book about obsessive love. And it's gonna have a lot of poems in it that people are gonna wonder, oh, wow, where'd that come from? And I'm gonna keep talking about, my poems are not autobiographical. And that's the best I can do here, right?
Yeah, no, I understand, that's great,
So.
yeah. I'll keep the microphone with you because we're gonna open some questions up to the floor. Has anyone got some extremely clear questions?
I'd like to follow up with that. So where's the inspiration for that? It's not autobiographical. It's obviously like, well, no conjecture, but where's the inspiration for all that coming from? Dreams, erotica, you should watch some 50 Shades
I'm
of
glad
Grey.
you're asking me this. It's going to give me a chance to practice the lies I'm going to tell. I don't have to think about that. The inspiration comes from events in my life that don't necessarily add up to what the poem is about. How's that? Like that?
Yeah. Aspirational. Sort of?
Well, you know, I've lived a long life.
Thank you so much for the recognition.
It's a prompt. Anyone else?
What are your thoughts about the impact of artificial intelligence on poem writing?
I don't give it one thought.
Yay.
I don't care. It doesn't affect me. I don't read anything about it. Go with God. I don't even know what it means. And if I see anything written about it, I just throw it in the garbage or I don't read it. I don't care.
I'm curious about the title. Is it Sunbathing on Tyrone Power's Grave?
Yes.
Is that from a poem in the book?
Yes, so this is that's true. So if you've ever been, there's a cemetery. Thanks for asking that, because I love to tell. In Hollywood, on Santa Monica Boulevard, there's a cemetery called Hollywood Forever. Who's ever been there? Yeah, of course. So it's a famous cemetery, and now it's very fancy. They do films. You can go to have a picnic and sit on top of dead people and watch movies and all of this. But when I first moved to Los Angeles from New York, Boston to here in 1977, the Hollywood Forever Cemetery was a dump. You know, like a lot of things in LA weren't perky like they are now, although they're now like a dump again. But anyway, that cemetery, it was very sort of dumpy, and you could just walk through it and no one was there, no one cared, and like everything was just weird there. But they have a lot of movie stars, and Tyrone Power has a gorgeous, it's not more than a grave when it's raised up. Anyway, this beautiful slab of marble, and the swans go around it, and it's gorgeous. And I was still sunbathing back then, and I used to literally bring a towel and sunbathe on Tyrone Power's grave. Because the sun would come down, it's really hot, the marble is hot. It sounds really creepy, I'm sorry. So there is a poem in here called Sunbathing on Tyrone Power's grave, and I don't think you could do that anymore now.
What is when you're in the perfect mood, what is your favorite way of writing and what's your favorite rituals?
I wish there was something like that.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
A poem, as many of you know, it more grabs you. Well, there's two things. One is the sitting down every day and just seeing what comes out. I really, frankly, I can't do that. It's a lot. I can't do that. I can't make myself try to start to write something. Makes me sad, because if nothing comes out, you feel like it's despondent. But a poem will grab me, and it could be anywhere. An idea for a poem, and then I just go to work. So if I'm driving in the car and I hear on the radio, I steal a lot of headlines from KNX. I listen to that horrible news thing, like they're taking chocolate milk off the menu. That was the news story a few years ago. And it's like they're taking chocolate milk off the menu, and it was from a public school. I literally pulled over, took out my pad, and wrote, "They're taking chocolate milk off the menu. What next?" And now, when I get home, then the ritual begins. It's Tito's or Kettle One. No, I'm kidding. But then I'll sit there and then I'll take what I wrote in my pad and I'll type it out, and then, so you just have to be, I'm open to anything that I hear or see, and I write it down, and I hope that a poem will come from it. That's my ritual. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you
Thank
very
you.
much, Kim Dower, everyone. Thank you. Thank you so much, Marsha. Can we have another round of applause? There you go. Well, thank you so much for that, and also thank you for honouring Ellen to the Malibu community. I know many people in here were touched by Ellen and good friends with her too, so that was really wonderful to hear you read about her and in her honour also. I'm going to ask a couple of questions before opening it up to the rest of the room. I think one thing, you said about this book, and I've noticed it in a lot of your poetry, about a deep relationship, even reverence to the natural world. And I wanted to know what you thought poetry can do to deepen our engagement with the natural world.
Reverence is exactly the relationship we must all cultivate with the natural world. And to the extent that poetry slows us down and allows us to experience once again reverence, and to the extent that poetry is capable of holding in place the reverence we feel when we're there, it's perfect, right?
Thank you. I heard an interview that you were having before where you went into some detail about where the title for your most recently published book, Creature, came from. And you said that you had an experience with a hawk flying into the room and said you weren't going to go into detail there. Is that something you'd like to go into detail about with us here?
Okay, so I have quite a few screens, or windows without screens. Why? Screens are dirty. Screens don't let the air come in fully. So, and I can slide the windows open. So I had a window in the living room slid open, and there was a tree in front, and the hawk must have been chasing a small bird, and the bird took evasive action right in front of the window and went sideways, and the hawk just plunged through into the living room with enough force, because it's going very fast, that it ended up like 8 feet in, and then turned around, and suddenly it didn't know where it was. And I was in the kitchen, and I heard this sound like a thrashing against the glass. There's a big picture window there with only 8 inches open on one side. And I walked in, and I was like, what? What is that bird? And, and then I realized, at first I thought, well, maybe it's a harmless pigeon. And, I saw its talons up close. I saw its beak, and I saw how frantic it was. And it turned and saw me. And if there's one thing a hawk hates to make eye contact with a human. It's the worst thing for them. And so when we made eye contact, the hawk became hideously upset. I mean, really upset. And I thought, okay, I gotta get out of here, but first I gotta open as much as I can. So I crept up to the window, opened it. I opened the door. I ran to the dining room and opened both doors as wide as I could, the French doors. And then I ran and hid to give the hawk time to be calm and make its way out. And that is what happened. The hawk, when I left, was able to explore the situation in such a way as to safely leave and not harm itself. And that's what the title poem is about.
Thank you. Wonderful answer. I'm so glad to have heard the story. And my last question, I know you have poems in here, about your father and about Ellen, and I wanted to ask you about your process with writing poetry and how that affects how you process grief and what function poetry is playing in the grieving process.
Grief can be memorial, and grief can serve to venerate, and a poem can be a memorial. And like I said before, a poem holds things in place. It holds emotion. I like to call it a little bit of a haunting, like an emotional residue from another time. So the poem holds certain scenes and certain feelings, and that's true for any poem, right? So in that way, it's a good haunting. And I know it matters to my family, to my sister. I don't think my brothers read poetry, but my sisters for sure, and my nieces and nephews, they feel good about having that held for them.
Thank you. That's wonderful. So, thank you, Marsha. I want to open up the questions to the floor. Does anyone have any questions for Marsha? And I'm going to pass the microphone back over.
When you start a poem, do you start with an emotion or an image in your head?
You kind of have to get through. I met this woman in a bar a few weeks ago, and in Kansas City, and she told me, I would love to write poetry. We got to talking. I would love to write poetry, but I have to get through a mountain to do it, some kind of mountain. And, I immediately thought, oh God, she'd be a wonderful poet, because we all have to get through some kind of mountain to bring ourselves to poetry, right? So whatever inspires us, if something flicks through our mind and there's a little extra electricity in our brain, don't let that go. Don't miss the call. Or if you see an image, whatever it is. In the book, this book, there's a lot of poetry that is what they call ekphrastic poetry, meaning it responds to some art piece that I saw an image and something flickered.
Thank you.
Have you been writing poetry since you were like a little girl, or just later in life, or like always? Or?
Thank you for asking that question. When I was a little girl, I did want to be a writer. I really did. But when I got out of college, I immediately had to start working. And my work was to be a teacher. And to be a teacher is extremely compelling and encompassing work that ended up taking a lot of my time. And it wasn't until I went to Spain, where I'm going to tell you, teachers have it easier there. And then, and I met people there, and I met another writer there, a wonderful writer, and she told me about the idea of an MFA program, which is an extended program where you study poems, lots of poems. You become fully acquainted with poetry. Well, not fully, because no one ever is, but much more fully than I was before. And that really started me. And so before that, I did write, I journaled, and I belonged to a women's group. But after the MFA program, that's when I thought, maybe I could do this. Maybe I could, quote, become a poet.
What was the MFA program?
Oh, the MFA program I went to was at Vermont College of Fine Arts, and it was a low residency program, so you went twice a year. So I had the very shocking experience of being in Vermont in winter for 11 days.
Maybe one more? Very
I
much.
don't have a question.
Two
But
more
I
then.
just want to say you read with such elegance and beauty.
Thank you very much, kind sir.
Your words.
Now we go to Vincent.
Yep.
Curious how it is living with another poet. The possible benefits and the challenges, and I'm going to take notes and share them with Phil.
Oh, okay. I thought maybe you were thinking of moving in with another poet. Well, I think it's a benefit. It's a real benefit overall because, after all, we do understand both the discouragement that can come with poetry in terms of struggling with a piece, never feeling like you're getting it right, or feeling like if you do get it right, it doesn't get out into the world. And also the encouragement of, hey, want to listen to this? I might have something here. Kind of a feeling.
Sounds great. All right. Marsha, everyone, another round of applause. Thank you very much, Mariano. Can we get another round of applause? So we're going to move into the Q&A part of the segment. And you opened saying that your poems were not uplifting, but they were certainly transformative. And I was wondering, do you tend to feel an impulse to write about subjects that are more serious and less uplifting? And why did you decide that they were the poems that you thought would be best suited for us to hear today? Here's the mic.
Thank you, Nathan. It's a tricky question because we don't control, I think, our reaction to what we write about. I always say that, when people make cotton candy, it starts with a little bit of sugar and then becomes like a big cloud. So a poem is a little bit like that, but with pain. So normally a poem starts with something that keeps happening in me. Could be something negative, like the death of a family member. It could be something positive, uplifting. And then you take that thing that is there, it's like a friction, and you start working on it. It starts obsessing. Obsession is part of poetry. I think it's part of the arts, and that's how how the poems grow. I think that's the beginning. Why did I select these poems? The honest answer, some of them, this is the first time I read them aloud, and I just wanted to check how they fly or not with the audience. So, I also thought there was a certain theme with a reference to medicine, with the death of my brother, and also the sadness as a physical element in your body. So I wanted the reading to have a certain similar landscape.
Yeah. And I think in that, poetry certainly feels like the antithesis of small talk. We get straight into the meat and bones of everything. I know that for a good while you were doing LA poetry interview series,
Mm-hmm.
and I know you interviewed 65 or 66 poets during your time.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering what you felt like you learned from being able to, dive deeply into so many different poets, and how that affected yourself in your own writing through that learning.
Well, writing is a very isolated event. It's also isolating. So when I first came to California, I didn't know any poets. Also, I didn't know any poets. And I don't have a master's in creative poetry or creative writing. So I wanted to have like a master's degree just by talking to people. So I, with other collaborators, Hilda Weiss and Wayne, we made a list of poets from Los Angeles or in the Los Angeles area, and we interviewed many of them. When you think of Los Angeles, you think of actors, actresses, models, bodybuilders, all that. But there are many poets and many poetry readings, and so it's a poetry land also. So the first thing I learned from interviewing them, going to your question, is that I felt less alone. I think all of them have problems with writing, struggles, dry periods. So that was the first thing. I was like, okay, this is good. I am in this territory. And some poets, I realized they have a very kind of clear intellectual construct of how they write and what a poem is, and they can explain it to you very clearly, like Gail Vronsky or David St. Jones. Very clear. Other poets are more in the instinct. You ask them about this, it's all here. It's very interesting. It's like two. One is more like frontal brain, and another approach is a little more body centered. So that was interesting to experience, and also the generosity of these people, because they didn't know who I was. I'm not a journalist. I have no experience interviewing people, and they say yes. Every poet say yes. So they were as lonely as I was.
And do you feel more front of brain or intuitive bodily?
I think the poem is born more in the intuition, but then you have to work on it with your clear mind. I think all the editing and all the revisions and changes, that's more. It's like homework. You just have to do it. Yeah, like today with the Mercy of Memory. I was making changes this morning. Yeah, so.
I think quickly to respond, for me at least, the poems that you read flew. So, my other question is, because I know you write in English and you write in Spanish, and I know sometimes your work in Spanish has been translated by other poets into English, and sometimes you're writing both the languages at the same time. Do you have an impulse to write in either language, and how do you respond to these impulses, if so?
Yeah. Well, my first language is Spanish, so when I write in Spanish, I have more flexibility of register. I can write pretending different styles. When I write in English, I don't. I have a limitation. I write like a foreigner. But it is a productive limitation, because I think when I write in my own language, I get distracted. It's like going to an airport and seeing all these destinations and you are paralyzed and you don't go anywhere. With English, it's like a train. It's a one train, one path, and that's what I do. So it is a limitation, but it's productive in the sense that allows me to move forward. And I think anybody in the arts, we use a lot of self-imposed limitations. For example, a sonnet is 14 lines. It's not 15, and it has to rhyme in a certain way. So the limitations could be productive, could be helpful. The other big advantage of writing in a language that is not your language is that you create a certain emotional distance. So certain topics that are more in your vulnerable being, sexuality, death, I think I'm more daring to write in English because I have a little bit of buffering zone, as if I'm not the actual person writing. So that's an advantage. It helps you with being a little more daring. Sometimes I try. The poems come in a certain language, and that's something I don't really make a decision. They are like, for me, in my writing career, there are like three formats. One is a book comes in Spanish, and I do it in Spanish, and that's all. And then I had poets like Blas Falconer did the English version of Padre Tierra, Alicia Vogel did the English version of Tres Letras. So that's one path, the Spanish version. Another path is a book happens only in English, like Decoding Sparrows. It started in English, that's what it was, And even if I try to do like the Spanish version, it doesn't. It's very against my nature. So that's the second path. The third path is when, from the beginning, like an animal with two heads, I write the book in both languages. I write a little bit in English, and then I do the Spanish version, and then I do a little more of the Spanish. It's almost like braiding. And I have written, I think, 3 books with that technique. It's slow, because you have to be kind of dancing, but it's a very good method to discover what is unnecessary in the poem. When you do this double poem, if something doesn't work, it's very evident when you try to do the other language version. So that's basically how my brain has worked until now. The new book, the poems I was reading, it all came in also in English. But I'm in the process of writing a new manuscript, and it's in Spanish, and I would like to do a bilingual version, but I don't know.
Well, thank you. That was a very profound answer to think about, especially the buffering between ourselves.
And I want to say, sorry.
Yeah, please.
we love the mic. When you get to the mic, you don't let it go. Going back to the bilingual writing, I think everybody, even people who identify as monolingual, we have a lot of languages in us. And I think when we write, we select the language we want. So even for a monolingual person, there is a lot of selection in which language we are using. And I think poets are highly aware of that multilinguistic brain.
You can keep hold of the mic because we're going to go this way, so you get to have plenty of time with that. So do you have any questions?
Chris.
Hi, oh yes, you know my name. I got a question about just poetry in general, actually. So with like other art forms, you know, the ink on the page is not the art itself. Like with music, the notation is just a representation of the ultimate art, which is how we hear it, you know, the sound. Same with like a script for a play. What we see on stage is the actual play. The script is just a way of encoding that. So with poetry, you know, you were reading from words on a page, but then we also heard you. So if I'm reading your poetry or listening to you, which one's like the truest version of the poem?
Poetry is a very, it's a wild animal, because poetry is connected to music intensely. It's also connected to the visual arts. Many of the poems, they have a visual impact, like the calligrams, or even poems in the Baroque time, they represent a tree. So there's a big connection with the poems and the visual arts. Poetry is also connected with theater. Many theater plays are written in verse. So it's a wild creature. The poem happens when you complete the poem with your emotional being. That's the moment the poem is true. All the other are versions of the poem, but it only happens when. That's why the poems need to have space. If the poem is too evident, too clear, too what's the term? Didactic. There's no room for the reader to complete the poem with your own history, your own hopes. And that's when that happens, when the poem gives you enough room and you join the poem and you complete it, that's when the poem really happens. That's what I think. There's two hands, one, the gentleman in the back, and then you.
Do you use artificial intelligence in editing your poetry?
So the first question was about artificial intelligence, is that right? I don't have anything against artificial intelligence. So I think, in the 20s, the surrealist poets will write poems cutting out words from a newspaper, putting in a little bag, shaking the bag, taking the words one by one, and that's the poem. So, and that was a poem. So I don't have anything. I don't use it because I like the suffering of writing a poem. I like that pushing thing. That's what I like. So if the poem is, some poems are given to me. They are poems that for example, I'm in a conversation and I take the conversation and I make little changes, and that's the poem. Very few. So some poems are given to me, but I don't use artificial intelligence for that. Yes.
Just to the other gentleman's point earlier, I feel like when you read your poem, it allowed us to hear it individually. And that's really difficult because someone could read it and they could read it in a way that you're only hearing their way, and you read it in such a way that I think I felt it differently than the person next to me felt it, and it really was a beautiful reading, and I really do appreciate the way you did it.
That's the biggest compliment. That's the biggest compliment. There's a poet I admire, Luis Cernuda, originally from Spain. He lived here in California. And by the way, he has a poem about Malibu. It's called Malibu, Luis Cernuda. He died in 1963, and I studied him in school and later. And what he does is a very difficult thing he does. He writes in a way that it feels like he's talking to you, like only to you. It's like a secret code. And it's a very difficult thing to achieve. So I'm glad that you felt that. It's a big compliment. Yeah, I will tell you for lunch later.
It's a plan. Okay, one more.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe.
So there's image references that are based in Catholicism in your poetry. So
yes.
like, are you Catholic, and does your faith inform your art, and do you your spirituality and your artistic side come together sort of just naturally when you're writing, or not?
That's a big question. I am Catholic because I grew up Catholic, and I love the theater of it. It's just it's in my genes, it's in my DNA. Even if tomorrow I decide to be a Buddhist or an atheist or Jewish, even if I decided with all my might, I will still be moved by all the images of the Catholic Church. I grew up Catholic. I didn't have a bad experience being Catholic. I didn't feel repressed or anything. I also like the language of the Old Testament. I think it's because when I went to First Communion, I was 6 or I was 7 when I did my First Communion, and I went to Catechism when I was 6. And one of the things that was explained to us was, for example, how is it called, limbo, where a child goes to a limbo if he's not baptized. Is that right? And the soul floats there. I was 6, and it was in a small chapel inside the church, and I was exposed to that. That was heaven. To be forced to think of a soul floating forever in a space that is not heaven or hell or purgatory. You stretch your mind beautifully, and so that's in my poetry. I'm not a practicing Catholic. I don't agree with everything the Catholic Church say. My family was a very disobedient Catholic family. I don't have a spiritual practice. I think probably the arts are my spirituality, but definitely there's a reference to that universe, to the iconography and the language. So yeah, it's there.
Last one.
Last one.
Take the mic back. You see, I can't get it.
Go ahead.
When you have a turn in your poem, does it come when the poem comes, or does it surprise you on the page?
These questions are fantastic. So, what's your name?
Charlotte.
Charlotte says, when a turn happens in your poem, does it come naturally or does it surprise you? Surprise is a big thing in poetry. A good idea for a poem is always a disaster. Always a disaster. You have to have an idea for a poem and then forget about it. So it's good to have an idea to start writing about it, and then let the poem tell you where it goes. And there in the turn, I think the big question is, am I writing what I have to write? because I think sometimes we write to make something beautiful, or we write to look intelligent or witty, and I think the poem is forcing you to speak what you have to speak, say what you have to say, and I think the turn is that moment of truth, but it has to be a little bit a surprise, because if the writer is not surprised, the reader is not going to be surprised either. So, yeah. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you again, Mariano. Can we have a round of applause? We're going to have a Q&A. I have a few questions for Ricardo first. They're going to be hard-pressed questions, get sweating. So, Ricardo, one thing I notice about when you're reading your poetry is that you wed together such skillful storytelling, which feels off the cuff in between each one. What do you think the importance is of telling the stories before you read the poems to us and your listeners?
Aha. Well, I probably went on too long, and I apologize. But I kind of like to fill in a little bit so that you're not too surprised with the poem, right? So you kind of have a little feeling of what is going to come. And I like to also tell you what maybe prompted me to write it, or caused me, like when I explained the stumble in the Three Cows poem, or inserted the three cows because they were there, you know, and it just made it so much more interesting. So, are you saying that I should not go on so long?
No. There's.
I do like to ramble on a little bit, and I felt so comfortable with everybody that so I maybe I shouldn't apologize. It was okay.
No.
Yeah, I'm glad you took that apology back. It was not needed at all. How did it feel to be the first poet laureate of Malibu, and how does it feel to see, you know, its continuation and how it's been moving forward and growing through the years?
Yeah, well, you know, I said it already in the beginning, but it is wonderful, and I appreciate what you are doing, and I think we all love what Nathan is doing. Yes. Yeah. It's mythical, and it's light, and it's the ripple effect. I love that idea, and I think it continues the fire circle, my fire circle theme.
Yeah.
And so from where it began, I mean, I've always had this incredible support. Ann Buxey is here, Jolynn, oh my gosh. I see Mr. Woodcock back there, yeah, and Cynthia. So, you know, there was always Doug, Rucker. There were all of these wonderful people that helped out and made it happen. And I just kind of went along with it. It was really, I just went along with the flow. It was so lovely, yes. And I think really, really wonderful thing were the teachers. Remember the teachers that led us into the schools? And there was Miss Levy, Nancy Levy at the old Juan Cabrillo, and I just thought, wow, she just said yes. Oh yeah, bring this crazy poet guy into the classroom so he can teach our fifth graders. Yeah, and she was so supportive, and all the kids loved it. And that's how I met Jolynn. She was one of the mothers in the back of the room, and she continued to teach the whole time afterwards. And we just had those kids in the fifth grade were seniors this year, and we just had a big class with them. It was so much fun. Wasn't it, Jolynn?
Yes!
Yeah, it was great. It was really great.
Who knew? Do you know how you just wake up one morning and go, oh my God, 8 years went by?
Yeah.
What happened?
So I think there was some success.
You're very humble. He started the entire teaching schools to the kids. He started the whole thing in Malibu. Don't let him get up there and went with the flow. He started the entire program. He's here because
There we go.
Thank you.
And thank you, Ricardo, and for your continued focus on community and what poetry can do for us and for a community in bringing us all closer together. And I really appreciate that perspective, and it's helped me, alongside other people in this room, it's helped me focus on community first throughout this laureateship. So I really appreciate that.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
I'm going to hand you back the microphone, and you can keep hold of it, and we're going to ask questions from our lovely audience. So here you go. Questions?
I have a question.
Yes.
Ricardo, thank you so much, and Anne, thank you. You're such a great
Advocate.
yes. So you gave me so many images, and they're all swirling around in one, place. So the second poem
Yes.
that you read, there's an image of a girl in a green jacket and with braids. Is that right?
Yes, that is correct.
Could you tell me about that a little more, if you don't mind?
Yes. Okay. So, I don't know how many people have ever seen the salmon when they're running, and oh my God, it's unbelievable. It's just, you could really walk across the river on them, on their backs. And they're going up the river to die, right? And, leave their seed and die. So I was walking along the river, and there was a girl fishing, and I didn't really see her. It wasn't the girl that I described. The girl I described, Cynthia and I went to a cafe about 3 or 4 days later, and we came across this incredible little watercolor that this girl had painted. Not the girl that I saw, but another girl. And it had this big old salmon, a little girl with a smiley face, and she had perfectly the way I describe her in the story. With the jacket, the braids, the red hair, and the salmon. So I mixed the two images together.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you. Oh, Hildebrando! Thank you for coming.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here. Ricardo, I was thinking about your poem Blue, about the dog.
Yes.
And I thought it was so emotional in a way, and it made me think about Izzy. Do you have a poem about Izzy?
I do have a poem about Izzy. Thankfully, it's not with me.
Oh.
Because I wouldn't be able to read it. Oh, yeah. Cynthia and I had a little wiener dog, Izzy, and she was 18 years old. Wow. And so she just passed a couple months ago. Yeah. But it was a really lovely passing, in our laps. Yeah. So how much better could it be? Yeah. Thank you. Yes, Kelly.
Hi,
Carrie.
Ricardo, really wonderful work. I have a question. How do you find your poems? I was just wondering what inspires you.
Yeah, it's almost always by accident. It's a stumble. It's always a stumble. I'll start writing. You all know this. You start writing something, and then it turns into something completely different, right? And thankfully it does. The good ones turn into something different, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, I don't say, I'm going to write this morning at 8 o'clock in the morning. I do try to write at least 3 times a week. I sit down and really try to write. And a lot of times nothing's happening, but eventually, sometimes if I'm lucky, something happens. If I stumble.
Okay, Ricardo Means Ybarra, thank you.